All right, everybody, it's the Jere Metcalf Podcast where top real estate agents tell how they do it. And today on the show, we have another very special guest, Larry Rideout. He is the chairman for Gibson, Sothebys International Realty, in other words, owner, founder. And what a story. We were just talking about it a little bit. But Larry, thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you, Jen. I saw the list of participants and I'm honored to even be considered to talk to you because, as you said, it was top agents, and you'll have to get to that later.
We'll get to that. So, but you're only the CEO of Gibson. I mean, no, you're not even the CEO. We've interviewed your CEO, Colleen, but you are the owner, founder / title is chairman of, and you guys have 24. And I think you're about to, by the time this releases, you'll probably have 25 offices.
Yeah, very closely, I think. That will be true. And I do have a partner, my partner, Paul McGann. There's two of us that are owners of the company.
So tell us a partner. So we may talk a little about partnerships too, but let's go to the beginning. How and why did you get into real estate? Like, what's the story that led you to where you are today?
You know, it's a funny story because I come at it from a very different perspective and a very different life probably than most broker owners. I actually was, I moved around a lot. I was almost like a military kid, but I really wasn't. My father worked in a factory called U.S. Gibson, and he moved from one place to another, and I moved with him. So we never really owned a home. We always rented. And when it came time for me to finally have an opportunity to go to college, I went to college. I finally ended up in a really great high school, really in Delaware County, really township. Went to college, and as a lot of kids do, I wasn't mature enough to focus. So
maybe you were too mature. Some of us would argue.
Well, they helped me focus. They sent me on my way rather quickly, and now I was kind of out there with no money and nowhere to go. So I went home to my parents, and I went to work where my father worked in the factory. And
this is all you've been in Boston. Is all in Boston.
Yeah,
right?
The long story to that is that my parents moved back to Boston while I was in college. So when I had to leave college, I couldn't go back to Philadelphia because I had no money and I had nowhere to live. So I went to Boston begrudgingly. And that's kind of where I landed in a place called Charlestown. At about 18 years old, my dad took me into that factory and got me a job. And I threw 100-pound bags of plaster for 8 hours a day, loading trucks. That was what I thought the best use of my talents, I guess. And I did that for a couple of years. And I ended up, the gentleman that owned the trucking company that shipped the plaster that we would load took a liking to me because I was a hard worker. And he finally pulled me aside and said, "Why don't you come out here and work with me?" So I went from a factory worker to a teamster, and the pay was enormous compared to what I was being paid. So it was quite a step up, and it was the same job essentially. It wasn't anything glorious, but it was a whole lot better pay. And I did that for 11 years. And somewhere along the line, my wife became tired of my lifestyle because it was a little different. This was in the 70s. I'm giving my age away, but Charlestown was a little different kind of a world then. You lived it was a little rough and tumble. And she wasn't crazy about my lifestyle. And we had 2 kids. And so one day she just asked me to do something else. And I had a real estate license in my wallet, believe it or not, that I had renewed for years because my mother wanted me to get a real estate license, and I did it. So she saw the real estate license, cut out a lot of, every day I'd find a new ad in the, on the table, because it was Century 21 in those days was the king. So everybody was.
I remember, believe it or not, I remember the ads in the paper, and it was like free training. And I can remember looking at the ads and thinking, and I never went, but keep going. Yeah.
So I would go to satisfy her, but I didn't really want to do this. I would work my day, and then that night call someone and they would interview me, and I would. The level of my talent was that I could back an 18-wheeler down the middle of the street. That was really all I could do. So
now that takes talent, just for the record. I know enough to know that. I've actually driven one of those before. I say
I'm one of the only broker owners who could back a truck down the middle of the street and not hit a car.
That's hard to do, everybody. If anybody's ever tried to drive a semi, they have how many gears? Like 100?
Yeah. In those days, it was 10 gears, but now the trucks are much more sophisticated. But
anyway.
The thing is, no one would hire me, obviously. That wouldn't be, they'd say nice things. Thank you. We'll call you back. Nobody called me back. So I would appease my wife, go back to work. And I kept doing this till finally I went to a gentleman in Woburn, and this is where I live now. I've been here for 40 years. And he liked me, he liked my personality. And he said, go back and tell your wife that there's no pay, that there's no benefits, that you work 7 days a week. And you won't get paid unless you close the transaction. You have 2 kids, you have a mortgage. Just go back, and if she says to call me back, I'll hire you. And I went back and said exactly that to her. And she said, call him back. And I did.
Like, what a blessing.
Yeah.
Like,
Okay.
so you're like, what a good husband too.
Yeah, well,
So
we were kids.
So what was, because by now you're about 29.
Yeah, a little older. Yeah.
And you've got kids and you've got a wife who's like, you've just got to do something else. Like, she had some foresight, as we women usually do.
That's
I'm
right.
just going to go ahead and be sexist today and whatever. But what was going on in your mind?
I couldn't imagine what I was going to do or how I was going to do it. But this gentleman gave me some, again, Century 21 had a training program and that. So when I went up there, they put me into a training program, but I couldn't let any grass grow under my feet. I had bills. So what I had to do was get right out there. And I caught it. There was a run of a good market from, I hate to say years because now I'm giving away my age, but from 84 to 88, there was a run of a great market. I caught the front end of that market, and the houses were selling rapidly, kind of like they were 2 years ago before we had no inventory. And so I got into a good marketplace, and all of a sudden I could sell, and I sold homes and I paid my bills. But in complete disclosure, I was not a superstar or top agent. I paid my bills. That was essentially my strength, I guess. And,
but your wife was happier. You had somebody who wanted to hire you.
Yes.
And it lasted from 84 to 88.
Yep.
And
yep.
what was going on in your world, and what happened after that? Because obviously there's a lot more to this.
Oh yeah. Well, 88, the market crashed. 89, the banks went out of business. It was a horrific moment. And so I ended up, in that 84 to 88, I became manager of the company. I was running, now I was a manager. So in 88, they ran out of money. They couldn't pay me. No one could. Everybody was broke. So I went into another Century 21. But those 4 years, I began interacting with Century 21 corporate. In other words, I was going to their management courses. So they were getting to know me. And an opening happened in the corporate world about 90, I think. And they called me and said, would you like to be a consultant to our top 20% of our offices? And of course, I said, I don't know, because I'd have to take a cut in pay because it was a lower amount of pay. And again, my wife said, there's benefits, there's this, take the job. So I took the job, but I had no idea. I didn't even know what a P&L was. And I had to sit with people and talk about P&Ls. I could recruit. That was my strength. So I used that as my lead in with every broker owner talking about recruiting. And then they'd push me over to the P&L and I'd be looking at it. And it might as well have been another language for me. It didn't mean anything to me, but I learned it quickly. I'm a street guy, so I learned quickly what I have to know.
Common sense takes you a long way.
Exactly. So
and problem-solving abilities.
I ended up seeing all of them, all of the top 20%, and then HFS bought Century 21, lock, stock, and barrel. And that's HFS is now who Realogy is now. That was how they started. And their
so everybody listening, Realogy owns how many?
Bank, Century 21, the ERA. They have a licensing agreement with Sothebys, Better Homes and Gardens, and there's another one I'm probably missing. But they started out with Century 21 way back then. And what they did was, the first thing they did was, there was 40 regional offices. They closed them all. And there were 40 people in every regional office. They fired them all except for 2. So every regional office kept 2 people. And then they had to manage the entire region, which for me was all of New England. I was one of the lucky 2. They kept me. So I ended up managing an entire region. Then they turned into Cendant and they moved me into New Jersey. And I was running New England for 3 brands. And then I went into franchise sales. Eventually I went into the franchise sales side and eventually became senior vice president of franchise sales. So my strength in those days was that I knew every brand intimately because I competed on the street. I had 3 teams, Coldwell Banker, Century 21, ERA, everyone trying to get the independence or the merger acquisition done for the existing affiliates. My job was to go and help them get it done. So I became very familiar with all the brands. specifically the competitors, because everybody you talked to, you had to explain how you were better than they were. So it became an interesting opportunity for me, because in that time, Sothebys entered the arena. They weren't in it before. I think it was around 2005 or 4. And suddenly, no matter what brand I represented, everybody wanted Sotheby's. So I'm out there all the time selling Coldwell Banker or Century 21. And before they'd sign the agreement, they'd say, just tell me right now I can't be Sotheby's. And I didn't represent Sotheby's, but I knew everybody wanted to be Sotheby's. So my partner, who worked for Century 21 in New England, happened upon an office in the south end of Boston. They were going to sell. His job was to find an affiliate or merge and acquire. And he called me and said, why don't we do this? Because we've been doing for everybody else for 11 years. So we came into town and we did it. And Paul is actually the guy that said, why don't we go try to be Sotheby's? I knew it was a powerful brand, but he said, let's go get in front of Sotheby's. We did. They approved us in Boston, oddly enough. They gave us that approval, and it's exploded from there.
Well, you said they approved us in Boston, oddly enough.
Well,
what do you mean by that?
Because most of the affiliates that they were bringing on were very established companies with great track records. And I had a good track record in terms of, I had seen 1,000 companies. So they knew in Realogy that I knew about real estate, but I had never run a company, nor had Paul. So it was almost Mike, I don't know, are you familiar with Mike Good? Mike
I know.
Good, he's the architect of Sotheby's International Realty, as far as I'm concerned.
Okay.
He was the first guy to have that when they converted to a real estate franchise. And when he met me, and he said this to everybody, not just me, but he said, I'm going to give you a gift. And this gift is Sotheby's International Realty. You have to treat it like a gift, or we'll have to talk again. So when he did that, it made me realize how much invested he was in the brand, and how amazing the brand was once I saw the presentation.
True. Yeah.
But we were more or less a startup. They were only taking active companies at that time.
I remember that.
Yeah. So they blessed us, giving us an opportunity. That's essentially what they did. They said,
your story is unbelievable. Like everything about you and how everything happens. It's unbelievable. So I'm going to do a repeat back to your story, everybody, just so we make sure we get it all, because there's some more to this. But 2005, your partner says, hey, everybody kept asking about Sotheby's. And so Paul says, well, why don't we just be Sotheby's? And you're like, well, sure. So you pursued them.
Yes, we pursued them.
And they said, yeah, we'll do it, even though you've never owned a brokerage and everybody else we're talking to has.
Yeah.
So that was around 2005. So tell us, you open office and.
So we opened the office in 2006, and it was we acquired an independent. So, it's always a challenge to go in and say, hi, I'm your new owner. How do you like me now? There was 55 people there. And you always hold your breath when you do these things, because agents don't, by and large, like change. And those things happen. And there's a big competition out there. Everybody's going to chase them as soon as you say who you are. So we did that, and we talked to our people, and nobody left. And it literally was in my world, it's called retention. And the retention factor was 98%, which is a number that in all my transactions with Realogy, no one ever hit. You always would announce, and 10 people would run somewhere, or they'd reject it.
The minute you just mention it.
Yeah, nobody did. So they stayed with us, and many of them, here we are 15 years later, are still, that same office is still pretty much intact in terms of the people that were there when we started. So they've grown with us through all of this.
What do you think it was that they stayed? Was it you were so much better, or was it that they were so great to start with and you just brought them more? Or
they were great to start with in terms of their image was really a 3-office company. They dominated their marketplace. They gave us a chance. I think, hopefully you see through this conversation, I'm an honest guy. What you see is what you get with me.
I think that's kind of your secret sauce too, by the way. But
there's a joke out there that, I've been known to cry over a well-written menu. So I have my emotions are on my sleeve, and they knew that, they saw that, and I think they gave us the chance, which they have to do. So now when they give you the chance, you have to perform. And I think we performed well. I think we did what they were looking for, and we hope a little more. And so we were 3 companies. Then the crash hit in 2008, and we were in big trouble, like everybody was, but we had just bought a company. So all of our liquid funds had been used up when that happened.
Yeah.
So there was no credit. We had nothing going on. And we had a meeting and just said, look, we don't know how we're going to pay the bills, but we can do two things. We can go into a crouch and just give up, or we can attack. So we took the attack method. And what we did was we went out to all these companies that were also feeling the same pain we were in various markets in Boston, and just said, we can't afford to buy you. We can take over your expenses and, maybe offer you a higher split than normal to try to help pay for the company. But that's all we can do. And we're the only buyer out there. Nobody was doing that. So we ended up doing 7 acquisitions from 2000, probably
Wow.
9 to 11. And we did them in that manner, pretty much took the keys, took the expenses. And then in 2011, the market turned. And we were sitting in all of these amazing places in the market. And then we just grew the companies.
So in 11, you had 10 offices.
Yep, 10 offices. And they were all in the right spots. They're all in Boston, primarily, all around Boston. And we picked up Boston's very colloquial in a sense that it's the South End, Back Bay, Charlestown, waterfront. And people work within those markets. Now they cross over everywhere, but in those days, everybody stayed within their little markets. So we had flags in all of those markets when the market turned. And it just was a phenomenal success for us. Beth Dickerson, who you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, who's listening is behind me, by the way, everybody.
Yeah, she's amazing. And she was one of the ones that joined us early on when people weren't really believing we were going to do what we were going to do. And she led it. We acquired her, and not for the keys. She was in a good spot. So we actually acquired her. But the thing is, the fact that she came over at that time, because she was a preeminent realtor in the marketplace, gave us credibility. And that was a huge launch pad for us. And we, then we took it from there.
And Beth was a bartender before.
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
Beth was bartender to top luxury agent in Boston. And she's been on our podcast. And your story, but what I'm hearing, and this is relevant just to success in general, is you owned who you were. You had a lot of heart, and the risks you're taking, some of the risks that you were taking, like, in hindsight, it looks obvious that you would go and acquire offices and not have to pay for them and just take over and give them better splits until the market gets better, but not in the moment. Not in the moment. And then when your wife says, well, I don't like what you're doing, go do something else. Most men would be like, you were like, okay, like there's a faith that you clearly carry with you. And then I do want to talk, because I said you owned who you were. You might argue with me on that, but I would say no. But there were just we talked earlier about your career, because you're somebody who, as you said earlier, you're in college, you basically didn't mark out, and you're working, picking up 100-pound bags for a few years. And now here you sit, the owner and the chairman of Gibson Sothebys International Realty, with 24 and counting offices in New England and Boston, Massachusetts, of all parts of this country. That's not supposed to happen there. So, I mean, it's America. It is. But I think if anybody knows Boston, you might know what I mean. But tell me a little bit about that.
Well, one of the good things was I was a Boston kid. Like I said, I cut my teeth in Charlestown. And so I knew the people. I knew the markets. There was nothing unfamiliar to me in terms of the market. I just had to figure out how to make that apply to the real estate world. And we did. We just kind of went at it, and we picked the right spots. We did the right things. It was just, sometimes I always say you got to be lucky sometimes. And I've been very lucky my entire life, but I've never been afraid to take a risk. And there's a lot of sleepless nights here. There was no magic here. This was a lot of sleepless nights. I have my kids in the business, and 2 of them are very much into the corporate side of it. And they were around that kitchen table when the stress was probably the biggest in my life. And they still came into the company. So that always amazes me. My daughter, the smartest one, she went out and was a teacher. She got the heck out of the business. But the other 2 embraced it, and they're in it, and they're a big part of running my company now.
So when you're taking these risks, because it's not like just talking to you, you're somebody who's seen the harder side of life. I mean, you grew up working hard. You grew up, you didn't own. You grew up, you had to make your way. But so in that light, there's there's risks you've taken where you know what it's like to be hungry.
Oh,
You don't want to be hungry again. So when you look at, because I say this for all real estate agents and people who are growing and leading and whatever, when we're all looking at these big decisions to make, for you, how do you make decisions? How do you decide what risks are worth taking and which ones you're going to move? And how do you know, and you don't give up, clearly?
Yeah. The experience now is kicked in where I do it. We have enough experience in terms of, I'll just use the company as growth, but what you're saying is so true. Everything I'm talking about is applicable to an agent. They have the same, they wake up every morning unemployed. That's what I used to tell my agents when I trained them. Wake up unemployed, you got to find a job every day. And that's, from the outside looking in, the public thinks we're all millionaires and everything just falls in our lap. I see the hard work and effort put in there. And I see the sweat and I see the tears. So I understand they have the same issues that I have. On mine are on a bigger scale, but it's big to anyone that is, if it's their livelihood in their life. So it's all the same. You got to look at everything. In my mind now, I look at it strategically. If I'm going to grow the company, it has to benefit my existing company. I can't just buy a company that has no relationship to the rest of my company in terms of opportunity. So everything we do based on the existing company. And I think an agent does the same thing. One of the things that, and Colleen says it very nicely, when we're in tough times, people tend to widen the range of where they're trying to be, and where they shouldn't be doing that. They should be more specific and strategic, because what's happening is you're not doing a 100% job anywhere when you're out here, and you're doing 110% in here when you're focused. And it's the same way with a company. If I'm going to go somewhere, it's going to be a strategic benefit to the company that exists right now, or I'm not going to do it. And that's how we've moved from 3 offices to 24 offices. And maybe there'll be 25 by the time this comes out. But it's the same thing. If my agents that are loyal to me aren't going to benefit from something I'm going to do, I don't do it. And I think agents need to have that same mindset, where if it's not a benefit to my business, I don't need to be 6 towns away trying to sell a house that I know nothing about.
Because it's like you can't, it's basically the formula for multiplying, or the compound effect. Like in every decision you make, to repeat what you said in different words, when you make a decision, there's going to be a compound effect. It's going to be up or down. My dad used to always tell me, in life, nothing stays the same. It's going to get better or worse. And a lot of it has to do with what you do and the decisions you make. And even when you're taking risks, that's such a great example, is what do I have now in acquiring a company or in making this decision? Is there a way that is going to support what I have? Like in taking on a new client, does that support, in taking on this listing, does it support my existing clients, the other listings I have, the buyers I have, and where my time is allocated? Because when you're focused on a certain kind of client or property or whatever you're good at, when you take on those listings and those clients, the time spent working with them and doing that stuff actually feeds and multiplies the opportunities for what you do, rather than spread you thinner and thinner. But hearing, it makes it so simple, because so many people listening are either wanting to hear that on the agent aspect, or everybody's always looking to grow and lead. And when you're looking to grow a team, if you're going to grow a team, how are you going to make the decisions to grow and change what you do? And how can you subtract but multiply? Well, exactly. You just answered the question.
Yeah, the team concept is exactly the same. It's the same thing. I had a mentor that said to me, your real estate business is always growing. It's either growing larger or growing smaller. There's no status quo. So, you have to think about it like that. You've got to be growing your company all the time, but strategically. You can't sit in place, because the rest of the world will pass you by.
Exactly. Don't sit still, because it's not sitting. What is it? There's a quote, I think it's in Alice in Wonderland, and the queen of, but I read this actually, and I'm reading Jordan Peterson's 14 Rules for Life right now. Anybody who wants a good read, whatever you think of him, give him a chance and read the book. But it's the queen of whatever, Queen of Hearts or whatever the queen. But she says, in my world, if you stop moving, you've got to look at the quote, but it's like, in my world, you don't stop moving. You stop moving, you get destroyed. Like that's not, and that's life. Like life is movement. Life is activity. Life is doing things. So what do you think, looking at you, because I love how you weren't an agent that long, but you say, excuse me, I wasn't really that great of an agent. But all agents are just great at doing the same things successful people are. What, this is a loaded question possibly, so answer it how you like. But what do you think it is that does make agents successful? And what is it that made you successful? Because you were incredibly successful. And sure, there was some luck, but that doesn't come alone.
Yeah, no, for me, I guess I saw early on, and even before real estate, that I had the ability to create loyalty and lead people. I knew that. When I played softball for a local place, I ended up being the manager. I always think I ended up running everything every time I got involved in something. And it kind of told me that there was something else there besides the specific of selling real estate. And when I get into my first company, people would come to me for advice. Well, I drove a truck. I don't, but they still trusted me for advice. So I realized that I had something where I could lead, and it was a moment in my life when I just said, you know what, I maybe am not the best salesperson, but I could certainly figure out how to lead a team to success. And I kind of, all the way through Realogy, had that good fortune of having teams that were always number one or number two in whatever we did every year. And they were loyal. That was a big thing to me, is loyalty, because I'm a street guy and that's a big deal to me. But if people are loyal to me, then I'm loyal to them, and we figure it out together. And it's always been one of the qualities I kind of watch most closely when I interview people or I see people. Like, you can almost get a sense of whether it's all about me, or it's about let's get this done together and everybody can be successful. So that was always my philosophy, is it takes a team to do everything, And I just carried that through. And again, as an agent, like I said, I wasn't a terrible agent, but the people you talk to are amazing. And I was never an amazing person. That would never been our concept.
That's not true. That's not true, but that's what all amazing people say, is they're not amazing, everybody else is. But there you go. Which leads me to a question I was just thinking is, you are to accomplish what you've accomplished and be who you are and do what you've done, you're so incredibly humble. And I find there are people who are humble to the point of undermining themselves, and you're not that kind of humble. What can you tell us about being humble and how you can keep your humility and be the leader that you are? And in being the leader that you are, ego is clearly not taken over.
Yeah, this is the part where I'll have to not be emotional while I talk about it. But it's not hard to be humble. It's about remembering to be humble. And I'm not saying I'm humble. You said that, I'll use that word. But the reality is, I never forget where I came from. I never forget how I got here. I feel like I'm blessed that I am where I am right now, to be honest with you. It's just amazing. But I can look back and remember swimming. I told you, I learned to swim in a fire hydrant. So there was a time in my life, and I didn't know that wasn't a good thing, to be honest with you. I told my wife and I talked about that. We didn't know,
That's awesome, though. I love that. That's so refreshing. Some kids need to be doing that again. I'm just saying,
Yeah. My wife grew up the same way, so we have that conversation where we laugh about, how, if you look back, how rough our lives were, but we didn't know they were rough. We enjoyed them. But
exactly.
Looking back, you realize, and you don't forget that stuff. And then there were rough times throughout my life. With, like I said, even in 2008, when everything was crashing, that was one of the worst times of my life, my personal life. I'm looking at my children. Two of them were getting ready to go to college, and all of a sudden, it didn't look like it was going to happen, or I wouldn't be able to help them. And it was a terrible feeling to be helpless like that. So I remember, I don't forget that stuff all the way through. And I'm very fortunate now. We have a great company. I have great agents. With all the competition around us, the fact that everyone kind of stays together means so much to me. And it's just, I feel so blessed that way. But I also know it's because we are very choosy on who we pick and bring and join us. We're not just signing names up. They have to go through quite an interview process, including talking to myself or Paul at some point, and then we decide whether we move forward. And so far, we've maintained the level that we want within our company of what we call a white glove service, but more importantly, people that have a moral compass and and they do the right thing, and I'm not religious by any means, but for me, it's, treat people the way you want to be treated. And we try to stick with that when we bring someone aboard.
Yeah, and clearly you do that, and it's almost always says it's like kind of like a law of physics. It just, what you put out to the world, it really tends to come back.
Yeah, no, I agree with that.
In being a leader, you've said words like leading people, learning. Remember, people do more together. We do more together, and you have a value, and you see what everybody who comes to the table has to offer. And it sounds like when they don't, it's not a contemptuous thing. It's just, hey, this isn't the right place for you, and it's a disservice to you and everybody else for you to stay.
Right. And that's just how we say it. It's not the right fit for you or me. And neither one of us would benefit from it. Let's just move on and be friends. We're all in the same circles.
What would you say in leadership?
But I had my teams.
No, you're saying.
No, I was just saying the teams in. Go ahead, Jared. I'm sorry.
No, you go. There's a layover, I think, in us talking. And so you think I'm interrupting you, but I'm not. So tell your story again so we can hear it, because you're talking about a team.
Yeah, the teams in Realogy, when I got on the franchise sales side, it was all based on numbers, and it was literally quarterly. So all of these teams had hit numbers every quarter. And when I went in there, it was kind of like I don't know, a nice word to say, but it was a very cutthroat business. And the leaders of the teams essentially went through teams every 6 months, because they wouldn't hit their number by the 6th month. They'd hire a whole new team. I saw that, and it didn't make any sense to me. It was like, why would I put my time and effort into someone for 6 months and then start over again? So I was the anomaly there, that my teams, when I was there for 6 years in franchise sales, those same teams were in place when I left. No one left. And now, obviously, they've all gone different ways. But so I didn't have to reteach and relearn, but it took extra effort to make them feel like, you know what, if they were in a jam somewhere trying to get something done, I got on a plane and went there and helped them finish it. And they always knew I had their backs. So the loyalty thing was there, and we hit our number every quarter, and I lost barely anyone. And the other teams would shift every 6 months. There'd be new people. And that was the philosophy. So we kind of went against the grain in a lot of ways that they ran it, but it was hugely successful for me, because if you can embrace the people that work for you, they're going to embrace you back, and we're going to figure it out together. And it's kind of what I've always believed.
So on that's in team building. So you've said so many, I love talking to you, because there's so many things that I feel like you just take for granted in the way you are and think and do things that we can all learn so much from. For example, you're talking about, you had teams where, you talked about when people run things on meeting a quota, they're doing it to avoid missing what their intuition would tell them about what goes wrong, and to avoid that. But what happens is the opposite. It's just destructive. And in running teams, anyone that's done it or dealt with people, it's still not easy. You can't just be nice to people and think they're going to show up and do their job. Nope. So, because that's just not how it works. But you can't just say you didn't meet your numbers, you're out either.
Right.
That hurts so what is it? I mean, you said embrace who works for you and having their backs, that's huge. But how do you, because sometimes you, like we said, you don't want to retain the wrong people, right, but you want to keep the right people. And is there, obviously you're good at it, but is there something tangible that you can give us that you recognize or that you've even learned over the years about that?
It was about being honest with people. Like if someone wasn't putting the effort forth, they knew it. I wasn't a wilting flower by any means. I would tell them that you have to do your job, and here's how you have to do it. I always called it firm but fair. That's what I was. I made sure
firm but fair.
Made sure they understood what the job was and what they had to do. And it was my job to make sure that they actually stayed on track. And if they didn't, then that plane that I took to help them would be the same plane I went in to say, hey, get your act together here, because we're not going in the same direction. And I will have to do something if that happens. And generally, if someone has that inner workings inside them, they fire that up and they do it again. And again, it's all who you pick as well. Like I would be careful who I picked to replace someone if they did leave, to get the right team. And it's fun for me. 15 years later, since I left there, there's 2 of them out there that are very successful. And when I call them, they still call me boss. which is,
Oh, wow.
means so much to me. They don't even know it, but it just means a lot to me that 15 years away from them and they're still calling me boss,
Yeah, I love that. I mean, it's a loyalty and just working together and being together and having that consensus. What would you say, looking back, because clearly you kind of were born in a way that you naturally, I think you have this way of embracing people and having gratitude for what they bring to the table that makes you a great leader, and that way of being humble, but knowing how to be firm but fair. But like, is there an example of something just really went bad and or can you give us something that, like, don't tell us all the horrible things that happened unless you want to, but what is something that's happened where it looked rough and it's just a specific story that you can go there and be there and say, this is where I was, and then this is what I learned and carried forward through my business that is a reason for so much of my success now?
Huh. There's been so many stories. I don't know which one I could.
And that was a bit broad. I mean, because we've talked about 2008. We talked about.
Yeah.
We talked a little bit about, if you would share with us, because you came from growing up rough to you made it to college and didn't really make it out, but you still, despite not even having your focus on that, but the rest of the world wanted it for you, end up in the corporate world. Yeah. And you talked about how you went to interviews and there's a certain, especially, in the 70s, like, people thought a little bit differently about, I mean, even now in the corporate world, but give us a little bit about that, about your interviews and how you kind of handled climbing that corporate ladder a little bit and what you learned.
Yeah, it's a badly kept secret now, but I didn't talk about any of my background through most of my life, including, I think, my first interview with Century 21 back when I was, that first job. No one asked me for a real legitimate resume. I went in and met with people. I was always fortunate that they knew me. I was there with them for 4 years as a manager, going through their courses, having fun with them, hanging out with them. So the interview process was probably a little more easy for me. And they hired me, and I was shocked they hired me. So once I got in there, now you had to produce to not be called out, I guess, my whole life. So I probably worked harder than most people work to make sure that no issue ever came up. So I always tried to be on the front of everything and, on top of everything, running everything perfectly, because I never wanted anyone to have to say, well, we're going to move you to another position. Why don't you share your resume? I hid that for, as I said,
wow.
until I was 60. I didn't tell anyone any of that.
That's amazing. Yeah.
Colleen Barry's the one that convinced me to make that little video. And I literally, when it went out, I was petrified, because I thought, I'm in this position with this brand that is phenomenal. And I'm not the one, I don't really have the background to be there. And it went the whole other way. The video was a home run. People loved it. And I realized I wish I hadn't hit it. Well, I would have had to hide it way back when, but I wish I would have talked about it sooner than, but it's been wonderful. It was a relief for me. Once I got out there, now I was relieved that I could be myself. I always am myself, but there's always that reserved part of me that would say, I'm not going to speak too much here and have someone ask me a question that I couldn't answer. And now I'm so much more comfortable. It's the best thing I ever did in terms of my life and what my professional life.
Oh, and how inspiring. I mean, how inspiring. Look at what you've done. And it's been just on sheer, it's not, you didn't need not to discourage or encourage. I mean, I really don't want to discourage or encourage people to college, because it's got its pros and cons for everybody, and it's not for everybody. And I hope, if I did offend everybody, I guess it's okay. But anyway, but in that, like, look at you couldn't have planned. You could not have planned where you are today.
No.
You could, if this had been your goal, you'd be somewhere else, because what happened wouldn't have happened.
Yeah.
Which is just like, it reminds me of a book. Everybody knows Untethered Soul by Mickey Singer. Have you ever heard of that one? It was on the Oprah bestseller, but my favorite is not on the Oprah bestseller, but it's his autobiography, Surrender Experiment.
Yeah. I don't know that. No.
But you know Untethered Soul?
Mm-hmm.
Right. Well, his story is, he has a story about, actually, and then it makes Untethered Soul even better. Untethered Soul is a book about kind of meditations and your thoughts aren't you, and life and all of that, and being a better person and having better thoughts. But Surrender Experiment talks about how he didn't intend anything other than to stop meditating all the time, because that's what he did at first, and to like submit and just whatever the world brought him. Okay, I'll run with that. And then he ends up, really good things and really bad things happened, but he talks about all he got out of that in his life and having that pursuit, and the things that would have never happened had he not come at it that way.
Yeah, the path is very interesting that people take in their lives. It's amazing, and that's part of and I don't want to use the humble word, but that's part of when I look back and think of the turns I made in certain times and moments and decisions I made that turned out to be the right thing to do. And I could have totally gone the other way so easily. It's just incredible.
What is the common denominator, do you think, that kept you on such a path, especially one that nobody could have even planned?
Yeah, I think it was, in my heart, I always wanted to do the right thing. I was in situations where that wasn't necessarily always the case in certain circumstances, but I always tried to move towards the right thing, whatever that might be. And it's just in my life. I don't want to get into long stuff, but I would always try to make the right decision. I'm thinking of all these stories that I really can't share with you, but it always seemed to work out for me that I made the right decision. There was times when I probably had a little luck on my side and stayed out of what could have been a bad situation.
Yeah.
Times I made the right decision. Sometimes I didn't, but I managed to squeak by and get away. And just got my mind racing right now thinking about all that. But it's been quite a walk. Of my life has been quite a walk. Different
well, this will make it easier, so I don't ask you questions you can't answer, because I'm not. This isn't like Dateline or anything, or whatever, right. Or 2020 or whatever those shows are, where they want to do that. Even though we do like to get good, I do have a lot of people go, I never thought about that. I've never told anybody this. As long as you want to share it. But on that, in learning that, because you've got such a great story, and you're leading these agents who have, by the nature of our business, we have similar stories. What have you found in watching the agents that really, because you have got many of your agents are ranked top agents in the country in your office. And in that, what do you see and find is that in interviewing them, and not taking everybody, anyway, what is the common denominator of these agents who are so successful? What do you find? What is the common denominator, and are there any outliers or differences you've seen?
Well, the fire in the belly is a big deal to me, that somebody wants to make themselves successful. And if you have a conversation long enough with someone, you see or hear that, that there's really a drive there. And then what my job and Paul's job was to provide the wind under their sails. See, we can't make an agent a great agent. They're going to be great agents no matter who they work for. What we can do is put the wind under their sails. And so we always keep that in mind. We're not, Beth Dickerson would be Beth Dickerson no matter who she worked for. But my job was to make her even better than she anticipated and give her more opportunities. And so we always look at it from that perspective. The person that we're bringing on, most time, I always joke, I say I have the Hall of Fame of agents as far as I'm concerned. They have agents that are amazing, and you've interviewed many of them. So and
I don't interview everybody. So
no, I know.
But I've interviewed several agents in your office for that reason. Exactly.
Yeah, that's why I can't imagine I'm talking to you right now, but I figured this is just the
well, back at you, because you're the chairman of the office of these superstars around the top agents in the country.
But most of the people we hire would be amazing in any company they went into, but you have to be something. We have to provide a value that no one else can provide, and we feel like that's the support we provide, of course, but more importantly, with the brand I have, the opportunity to raise their average sale price, to increase their units, is so strong for us. And we have a good success track record now. So when we talk to people that have that fire in the belly, that are going to be successful no matter who they work for, we tell them we're going to make you even better than you anticipated. And we've been able to do that. So that's a great story for us when we're talking to someone.
That reinforces too, when you're hiring the right people, the brand that's feeding them, it feeds the brand. And people, a lot of times I'm like, Sothebys brand. I mean, I was a Sothebys agent for over 10 years and I was an agent for 18, so I know other brands. But there is definitely something to be said. But I always say, a brand is a brand for a reason, not just because it's got a pretty logo and everybody says it's a brand, but because of the talent and resources behind it that aren't behind other brands. That's why they're not the same brand. Yes. But what would you say the Sotheby? I mean, this is not a Sotheby's commercial, everybody, but I do like, especially people at Sotheby's, because I do find people are very curious about every company, but looking at Sotheby's, especially someone who has known so many more brands, what would you say that is?
It really is. What's exciting is it brings the luxury aspect is already without saying question. The consumer, when I talk to an agent about being in Sotheby's, I say, you have a challenge in front of you. When you go to a listing presentation, the bar is already higher than you expected. You're not going in there to win them. They are already expecting something that you have to deliver. That's Sotheby's. And when I represent the other brands, and I'm not denigrating the other brands, I loved them all. I love Century 21. It was my life for a long time. But there's a selling that they have to do at that kitchen table that the Sotheby agent doesn't need to do now, because they have an expectation of Sotheby's. Now you have to talk to them about yourself and your company.
And you better live up to it.
And you better live up to it. So that's the piece of the brand that I think is so incredible for us and the network. And if you're in it, the agents use each other 120%. I mean, our referral business with our Sotheby network is off the charts, because we all use each other, because guess what? We're all like kind. If I send something somewhere, I know they're going to be treated the way I would treat them. So that network is so powerful in terms of relocation and referral. And again, I don't want to make it an advertisement for Sotheby's, but when I was with all the other brands, this brand stood out to us as the one that if I was going to own a company, I'd want to be with that brand. And that's why we did what we did.
Being there from the beginning, what do you think it is, or because Sotheby's was an auction house, they weren't a brokerage. How did they carry that? Because truly, for any of you who have ever been, and this is again, I swear, it's like we're not going to say it's not a commercial again. Everybody knows it's not, but it is true. And it's just looking at businesses in general and developing your own personal brand. This is relevant. Is when you go to a convention for Sotheby's, it's different. Yes. It just is. But it's not like Sotheby's was a broker before. It's like a whole new entity and company. And you were there as being someone who was there from the beginning. How did they do that? Like, how did they transfer? What was the secret?
I'll mention a name. Mike Good was brought over.
Yeah, you talked about him.
Franchise. Yeah, his job was to create Sotheby's franchise with Realogy backing. So Realogy now has a 50% stake in it. Sotheby Auction House has a 50% stake. They both agreed to bring in Mike Good. And Mike Good, and he said this to me, and he said it to anyone that joined, would say to us, I'm going to give you a gift. And that gift is Sotheby's International Realty. And it sounds hokey, but it was for real, because he stood behind that gift, and he made it the way it is today. And you talk about, I used to go to when I represented all the brands, I went to all the conferences. And they used to do them back to back, and it was endless. It was a long time. I'd be 30 days in Las Vegas. It would be like way too much. But the thing is, then I went to a Sotheby conference, and it was night and day.
Yeah.
It was so professional and so well done. And not to knock the other ones, but no awards banquets, no things being passed out for 4 hours on a stage. They didn't do that. And that put him a step above. Mike had all these ideas. He implemented these ideas, and they've stayed with Sotheby's. Even he's moved on. He teaches a very cool course now in Realogy, but he's still an impact of the Sotheby International brand. So I would put it all on his vision, how he's perceived.
Well, he does not get enough credit, at least not in my world, but maybe I just need to read more, because it is truly, I always make the analogy when I look at athletes and I talk about, I've said this so many times, but not on the show actually, but if you go to, being someone from the South, if you go to the Masters, and most of you, I think, know what the Masters is, the golf tournament. I remember the first time I went, there's so many people there, and nobody has a cell phone, and the behavior and the conduct and the way people open doors, and they're so well behaved. And I'm thinking, I know these people have been to a Braves game, and half of them have been in a fight and punched one another. I'm not maybe I'm being a little cynical here, but the point is, the social experiment of it was the behavior. It was this expectation to live up to. People show up and live up to it, and they would be embarrassed not to. And Sotheby's as a company has done that.
That's right.
And I'm going to read up some more on Mike Goodman and figure out exactly what. And I'm not out to recreate Sotheby's. Clearly, you can't do that. But just to learn in business, and learn in building a team and learning in leadership. How do you do that? It's more than just having Sotheby's name. Not to undermine Sotheby's name, but there's more to it than that. It's amazing.
Anyone can take this conversation and make it to their advantage in any brand or anything they're doing, especially teams, because teams will go out there and set the expectation ultimately. In the beginning, they're going to have to get known, but eventually they are known. And then what happens is they have an expectation. They've set an expectation. Everybody can follow what Mike Good did. He just implemented it in an entire franchise, which was mind-boggling.
Amazing.
I don't think he gets enough credit for what he pulled off.
And to add something you said earlier, I just loved, because you didn't say it directly, but you talked about an experience of quotas. When you just put quotas out there and say, well, you got to meet it, that doesn't get the job done either.
No,
yeah, you just have to do it. People aren't, because people, what is the quote? There's no such thing as lazy people, only uninspired people. Maybe that could be a whole loaded argument with somebody. But at the end of the day, and if they can't be inspired, they're in the wrong job and the wrong seat on the bus.
Right.
And I'm just regurgitating what I heard from you in last words.
You're doing it better than I am.
Well, I don't know about that. All right. So we have a final 3 on every interview, and we're going to do the final 3 for you now. And don't worry, they're easy. So the first, except I haven't done an interview in a while, so I got to remember. But the first of the final 3 is, and I remember now, and you can answer this for agents you're leading or for yourself as a leader in the real estate industry. What have you found to be the most powerful, impactful tool on your business development or running a business?
I think doing what you said you were going to do is what I would see is the most important. When I sit with someone and say, this is how we do it, this is why we do it, this is the way we do it, and then I need to do it. And that's, your word means something. And I think that's probably when we're talking to a recruit and we're telling them all the things we're going to do. My leadership team is amazing and they get it done, and we get so many great, because we always follow up. Like 3 months later, we ask how we're doing. Did we get everything done? Give us a critique. And everyone says, you did everything you said you were going to do. And I think that's the most critical piece you can do. And if they say we missed something, we go back and fix it. And we make sure it doesn't happen again.
Do what you say you'll do and make sure you're accountable to it every time. Don't be afraid to ask and follow up.
No.
All right. Next question is there a book that you've read that, whether it's life or career or both, that's been life-changing, and what is it?
This is going to show my age too, but it is Marketing Warfare, Reese and Trout. Came out probably in the 80s. And I, again, didn't have a background in real estate, didn't have a background really in anything. And I read that book inside and out and tried to follow the tenets of the book. And
wow, Marketing Warfare. I love it, because you said you've only done it twice because you're such a nice guy. You're all about, but you are about loyalty and keeping your word. But there was one time you talked about you either run away and hide or you fight. And we fight, or you attack. That was the word. And then this one is, the book is Marketing Warfare. Watch out for this guy.
You get a sense of my old world.
I love it. So, especially being Southern, that's how we are in the South. We just talk about it. But no, but Marketing Warfare. Who's the author?
Reese and Trout, R-E-I-S and Trout. There was 2 authors.
Oh wow, Reese and Trump. So,
not Trump, Trout.
Oh, Troutman.
Yeah, don't get me in trouble.
I know, I shouldn't do that. So I wouldn't get in trouble where I am. But so Marketing Warfare, Reese and Troutman are the authors.
Trout, yeah.
So you told us a little bit, but give me one more time. What was your big takeaway from that?
Just a synopsis of it was, you don't try to defeat your foe. I know I'm talking in metaphors and again fighting in war, but
no, I love this.
You need to find the weakness in your opponent and attack the weakness, not try to go head to head with them on their strengths. It's really that's the bottom line of the whole thing. And you know what? I've implemented it. I've done this even to today with my competitors. They all have their own strengths. Man, they have some weaknesses, and we make sure we know where they are and what we
Right. Don't highlight their strengths. That's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. I mean, that's like, talk about, there's a competitive edge. And then the strength that Sotheby's has is so undeniable.
It is. It's amazing.
And you as a leader, by the way. All right, last question.
Chicken Parmesan.
Now, what is the question? This is not Jeopardy. What is the question? Is that your favorite dinner? Is that your favorite? You don't look Italian. Is there some Italian in there?
No, I'm Irish.
Right. So I'm actually Irish, and my name's Irish, but I'm married to an Italian who married an Irish in there. Anyway, so what, if there's anything, everybody listening to this interview, if they're going to forget everything we say and only remember one thing, what one thing would you say to remember?
Just what I said almost near the end. Do what you promise that you will do. It's really simple. You know, if someone's going to entrust their livelihood to you, or they're listening to you, let's put it on all levels, then you need to do exactly what you said you were going to do to get them successful, make that successful. That's probably the most important thing I can say to anyone.
Great advice. And you have a way of saying it, Larry, that I'm like, I don't want to let that guy down. He might be nice and humble, but there's something about him. I don't want to let him down. And I mean, it's inspiring, but also fearful in a good way, because it makes you look at yourself in the mirror the way you just said that. That was great advice. Larry, thank you so much. It's good to see you.
Thank you for this opportunity. You really have been gracious and kind to me.
You have. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening to the Jere Metcalf Podcast, where top real estate agents tell how they do it. If you like this episode, please share it with friends. To find more episodes, search Jere Metcalf Podcast on any platform for podcasts, or go to JereMetcalfPodcast.com. That's JereMetcalf podcast.com.